As you've probably heard by now, we've teamed up with BetMGM this season. We'll be using BetMGM lines to make all of our picks, and we'll have special offers for our listeners each week. If you haven't signed up for BetMGM yet, use bonus code The Athletic, and you'll get a 1-year subscription to The Athletic, plus up to a $1,500 first bet offer on your first wager with BetMGM. Here's how it works. Download the BetMGM app and sign up using bonus code The Athletic. Make your first deposit of at least $10. Place your first bet on any game and claim your voucher for a 1-year subscription to The Athletic. See BetMGM.com for terms. U.S. promotional offers not available in D.C., Mississippi, New York, Nevada, Ontario, or Puerto Rico. Gambling problem? Call 1-800-GAMBLER. Available in the U.S. Call 877-8-HOPE-NY or text HOPE-NY 467-369 in New York. Call 1-800-NEXT-STEP in Arizona. 1-800-327-5050 in Massachusetts. 1-800-BETS-OFF in Iowa. 1-800-270-7117 for confidential help in Michigan. 1-800-981-0023 in Puerto Rico. First bet offer for new customers only in partnership with Kansas Crossing Casino and Hotel. Don't forget, if you haven't signed up for BetMGM yet, use bonus code The Athletic, and you'll get a 1-year subscription to The Athletic, plus up to a $1,500 first bet offer on your first wager.
This episode is supported by Merrill. With a dedicated Merrill advisor, you get a personalized plan for your financial goals. And when plans change, Merrill's with you every step of the way. Go to ml.com/bullish to learn more. Merrill, a Bank of America company. What would you like the power to do? Investing involves risk. Merrill Lynch, Pierce, Fenner & Smith Incorporated, registered broker-dealer. Registered investment advisor. Member SIPC.
All right, here's a quick pop quiz. What do Kim Kardashian, Justin Bieber, and Mr. Beast all have in common, other than 1 billion followers on social media? Yeah, they all use Shopify to run their businesses. An often overlooked secret of success is actually the businesses behind the business making selling simple. For millions of businesses, that business is Shopify. Nobody does selling better than Shopify, home of the #1 checkout on the planet, and the not-so-secret secret, with Shop Pay that boosts conversions up to 50%, meaning way less carts going abandoned and way more sales going... So, if you're into growing your business, your commerce platform better be ready to sell wherever your customers are scrolling or strolling, on the web, in your store, in their feed, and everywhere in between. Businesses that sell more sell on Shopify. Upgrade your business and get the same checkout Kim uses for Skims. Sign up for your $1 per month trial period at shopify.com/theathletic. It's all lowercase. Go to shopify.com/theathletic to upgrade your selling today. Shopify.com/theathletic.
The Athletic.
The race is on, and it's official. Adrian Newey is joining Aston Martin as managing technical partner. But what does that mean for the team's hopes of rising to the top in F1? And why does his role mean rival teams should be even more fearful than they already were? I'm Edd Straw, and joining us to discuss probably the biggest non-driver signing in F1 history are Mark Hughes and Ben Anderson. Well, Mark, we'll come to you first because you were there at Aston Martin's factory. People who watch the live stream will have seen you chipping in with a question. So what was it like actually being on the ground?
Yeah, I mean, it was a very big deal. It's certainly the first launch I've ever been to, first presentation I've ever been to for the recruitment of a technical personnel. You know, they're usually just for car launches or occasionally for driver recruitments. But yeah, this is the first time that, in my knowledge, has ever been a full-on, media session for the signing of a technical director or somebody. That's not his label, but his technical partner is his title now. So yeah, it was quite a big deal. And before he came to see us, he was introduced by Lawrence Stroll to the staff out in the what they call the street. It's this piece between the two buildings of the factory, which is laid out like a street. And they were all out there, and there was just a spontaneous cheer of applause from about 800 people, just as he announced Adrian was indeed joining. So yeah, a lot of razzmatazz, a very big deal. And it is a big deal. It's in Formula One terms, it's pretty seismic, and the event reflected that.
Yeah, proper technical rock star, Adrian Newey. So what do you think, Ben? Biggest non-driver signing in F1 history, as in of all the things that teams have done, outside of a few of the big driver signings, is this the most massive?
Yeah, I think it has to be. I mean, the very fact that you had this whole show put on, a live stream event, a proper press conference, the team, effectively the team owner, paraded to introduce the signing, bringing on as a partner, as Mark was outlining, normally in this kind of scenario for us, it's a press release drops, there's a picture of the guy, he's maybe in a new team gear, probably not because he's on gardening leave, there's some perfunctory quotes, you might get a picture with the team principal as well if it's a particularly big deal, and then normally you debate, how big is this, how much coverage do you devote to this kind of thing, does it just make the bar for social media, do you bother doing an article, if it's a bigger name you will do. Newey, it's like a whole new stratosphere of significance compared to someone being announced as a technical director for Mercedes, say, Ferrari, even Enrico Cardile, who's going to be Newey's colleague next year. When he was announced, that was quite a big signing from Ferrari, but nothing like this kind of scale of unveiling and chat and everything else. So yeah, he's been placed up there with signing someone like Fernando Alonso or Lewis Hamilton or Max Verstappen.
Yeah, you could probably say that it's as big as when Red Bull signed Newey or when McLaren signed Newey, but of course it wasn't such a big story and it wasn't handled in the same way. I think, as you've just both explained there, that's what elevates this. I'm a little bit disappointed they didn't have him sat under a sheet on the stage and then brought Fernando Alonso, Lawrence Stroll and Lawrence Stroll onto unveil him. But
having the drivers on stage, I mean, that was another thing. They actually made a point of calling up both drivers to have to say some remarks on the fact Newey has joined. I mean, you never get that. You never get the drivers until they're spoken to at a race meeting saying something about this guy who's just been hired. So yeah, I mean, they could well have had Newey under a sheet and just had Lance and Fernando come up to whip the sheet off, except of course it's like the worst kept secret in Formula One. It's not like it was like a new car launch in the way the event was done, but everyone's known for some time that Newey's going to wash up at Aston Martin.
Yeah, exactly. This has not come as a surprise, and there's been plenty of chat about it in the build-up to it. Obviously, it has been a transfer saga as well. Yes. Much like the driver market, it's been an endless saga this year. So too is where's Newey going. But Mark, as you mentioned, he's managing technical partner. He's got a shareholding in the team. What really struck me is how big his role is, as it's described as day-to-day. But why did Newey pick Aston Martin, given he had his choice of any destination or going nowhere at all if he fancied just going on holiday for the rest of his life?
Yeah, I mean, he said that he decided he still needs a challenge. He didn't want to... He considered just going around the world in his yacht and then deciding what to do, but he couldn't even bring himself to sit still for that long, really. He wanted to challenge himself. This is a proper full-time role. It's not the step-back role of his latter couple of years at Red Bull, where he got very involved in the 22 car regs, but then took up more of an overview role. This is more like his initial role at Red Bull back in 2006, when he was the full-time technical boss, but now in a much bigger, more complex organisation with many more senior technical people already there. He reports directly to the owner, Lawrence Stroll, and that's a big part of why he chose to go there, aside from the reported $30 million a year, of course. He made the point several times that with Lawrence, he's talking directly to the boss. Now, Frederick Vasseur is not the ultimate boss of Ferrari, and even Freddie's bosses can change on the whim of the board. James Vowles is not the ultimate boss of Williams. The ultimate boss of McLaren is the Bahraini prince. Given that Adrian hates management interference, that was his big bugbear at McLaren, Lawrence is the perfect boss. And as Adrian says, he's quite unique in modern F1 in that he owns the team. And he's the boss of it. It's like Frank Williams in the old days, or Ron Dennis in the old days. Ferrari wasn't able to meet, not his demands, but his request, the ideal environment for him. And it would have been a lesser deal than that which had been offered by Luca de Montezemolo about 10 years ago, when he offered to give Adrian pretty much anything he wanted. This time around, Ferrari was keen to have him on board, but not unconditionally. And you can imagine Adrian thinking, well, that's not even what I was being offered a decade ago. So you can imagine that took the sheen off that. The conditions are much more to his liking at Aston. The facility's deeply impressive. The commitment from Lawrence Stroll to keep pumping in the investment, to do whatever it takes. The renewal of Adrian's great relationship with Honda. They're all pointing in the same direction. And I can imagine that as he's sat there and weighed it all up, that this ticked more boxes than any of the other possibilities, and they are major pluses. But for his part, Lawrence has not just said, yeah, you can come in and do anything you want and take as little or as much time as you want. He wants Adrian to match that level of commitment, his level of commitment, and he has. And so that's what's brought the thing together.
I think one thing that's really striking is what it says about actually Lawrence Stroll's approach. Now, he's sunk vast amounts of money into this team. They've done a lot of great things, the factory, the wind tunnel, etc., etc. They're doing all the right bits of work in terms of building up the team. But you can offer Adrian Newey the keys to the kingdom and say, right, you can do anything you want, but you've just got to be full on, at least for the first few years. But Newey isn't somebody who will be fooled by an owner who's not going to really follow through. So I actually think the fact that Stroll has been able to convince Newey is actually kind of the biggest exhibit of just how ambitious and the potential of this team that's there than anything else, because you can't kind of pull the wool over Newey's eyes, can you? It says, look, I do believe in this project and I'm willing not just to sign up for it, but to commit day to day, 24/7. And that's just a huge deal, isn't it, Ben? That says this is a project that is making the right moves and should get there. So that's got to have been key, hasn't it? Because Newey didn't have to do this if he wasn't convinced.
No, exactly. He, as you said, he could have quite easily and considered just going off around the world, going into retirement. He spent several months. It was interesting, he revealed that he decided finally, I'm leaving Red Bull Japanese Grand Prix weekend. So that was early April. And then he didn't have this tour, this private tour of the Aston Martin facility for another couple of months. So he spent 2 months kind of just basically weighing everything up. Obviously he's decided, I'm not done with F1. I still have something to give. I think he's quite conscious of the fact that, even though he's 65 now, once you stop, when you've lived something for so long and done so well at it, that could be kind of the beginning of the end. So I kind of feel like he's someone who will just keep going. As he said, actually in the event, I'll keep going as long as people are prepared to have me. Obviously, many people were prepared to have him, but not quite on the terms that Lawrence Stroll was able to offer. And as Stroll's unique position as this kind of forefront owner, as Newey outlined, gives him the power to kind of go, yeah, okay, well, I'm going to directly take over negotiations, and I'll, as you say, give Newey the keys to the kingdom. But at the same time, in order to get those keys, Newey's got to do something tangible with them, and it feels like in some ways he's doing the Red Bull thing again, but just with more skin in the game. Obviously, there was a very heavily invested owner in Mateschitz with the Red Bull project, but it felt like the Red Bull racing side was kind of ring fenced, and it was like, well, Horner, a bit of Marco, Newey, you go and turn this Jaguar thing that hasn't worked into something that will work. But Mateschitz at a distance was still kind of this ethereal presence. He didn't have too much involvement. You saw him occasionally. Stroll is kind of much more hands-on as an owner, and Newey gets to be kind of a partner in that now, so he's kind of more senior, better remunerated, has more say. There's a pattern throughout his career of wanting to have more say in how things are done and kind of being sidelined by different management regimes. That shouldn't happen here, but he still has to kind of turn Aston Martin into a better sum of its parts than it is now. So he kind of has to repeat that trick from his early Red Bull days of setting the culture, getting the practices right, making sure the different egos mesh together in a productive way. So it's something he's done before, but it's not something he's done for quite a while, because obviously he and Horner got Red Bull going, winning, and then for the last 10 years, Newey's kind of stepped back pretty much from that. I know he bristled at the BBC suggestion that he was a 3 days a week man in the press conference. But can be no doubt that for the best part of the past decade, he's not been day-to-day hands-on. He's been stepped back and coming up with genius things and sprinkling his stardust. He has to do that too at Aston, but he's kind of got to go back to a former version of himself, at least to start with, to kind of get this misfiring Aston machine that seems to have all of the kind of ingredients you would need to be successful, but hasn't quite figured out yet how to stitch them all together into a coherent whole. And that's Newey's kind of job number one.
I think if you're, as I alluded to in the introduction, a rival team, you will be quite worried about this, because not only has Aston Martin got Adrian Newey on top of everything, but it's got this fully engaged, all in, was the way he described it, Adrian Newey. And I suspect a few years down the line, he'll probably scale back a little bit, but he's going to make this the team that he wants it to be, his technical vision. And particularly if you're Red Bull, you might be sat there thinking, have we got this a bit wrong? Because obviously you can talk about the new challenge, but things like shareholdings have always been important to Newey as a totem of his value, if you like, and that it's really his team. And Red Bull almost have been at pains to talk down the contribution Newey's made, which is to try and keep others on the technical team happy, because they felt Newey was too much of a lightning rod for credit. But yeah, Mark, if you were Red Bull, would you be thinking, oh dear, have we made a bit of a blunder here? And if you were one of the other teams that was in the mix, would you be thinking maybe we should have been a bit more aggressive? Because although Newey isn't a magic bullet, he doesn't automatically guarantee success. He, as Lawrence Stroll put it, he is the last piece of the puzzle. And as long as that puzzle is now put together properly from here, they should deliver.
It's got to be in the back of your mind if you're Red Bull or Ferrari or McLaren or any of these guys, because he is capable, as he's shown many times before, of remarkable things. And you just need to look at his track record. When he goes to a new team, it eventually wins, it dominates. Not always immediately, but it always happens. And Ferrari said they didn't want to get into a bidding war with Aston for him. Well, fair enough. But as Stroll says, almost regardless of how much we paid him, he's good value, and because of what he's going to give us. And if you're Lawrence Stroll in that position, you are raising the bar. You're raising the bar of what the competition has got to do to compete with that. Not immediately, but in the coming years. So yeah, I think I honestly think Lawrence has played this brilliantly well.
I'm not totally convinced that Red Bull could have done a huge amount. I feel like there's almost too many moving parts to that whole situation, starting from kind of Mateschitz' passing and the whole power struggle that went on behind the scenes between Austria and the UK. The Horner situation specifically is one element. But then there's also just this idea of a fresh start. I think one of the biggest fears the other teams will have is that Newey will be energised from going into a new project and have that kind of new manager bounce that's almost inevitable. And even if Red Bull in a parallel universe had taken more care of Newey or been more mindful amid this kind of recent internal warfare, I'm not sure you'd still be able to empower him to do much more than he's done. Whether he's been getting sufficient credit or not is a different question. But I feel like he was already on the way out, and the move of 2014 to give him this kind of more consultancy type role was already a step into semi-retirement, it seemed. And it's flip-flopped a bit depending on how competitive Red Bull have been. And he's got more engaged and less engaged depending on, chances of success. But I feel like for Newey to give the best of himself, he was going to have to leave Red Bull at some point. It's just a case then of, well, where do you land that gives you the best chance of getting the most out of Newey? And it feels like, from what you outlined, Ed, really what Aston has done is give Newey as much as he wanted to have and given him as much power as he wanted to have. It's almost like, okay, you tell us what you want for you to then give the best of yourself, whereas other teams were, particularly Ferrari, it sounds like, were just that bit too inflexible ultimately to be able to land. What is the closest I would say to a magic bullet, even though Toto Wolff likes to say there is no such thing. Newey's almost the closest thing to a magic bullet you could get in modern F1, I would say.
Well, it's because he combines that just good engineering foundation, pragmatism, lack of technical arrogance, with a kind of life lived in the three areas he talked about it, the aero, the mechanical design and the vehicle performance side. They're the three pillars. He's worked in all of them and worked collectively in them. He's great interpreting regs, tying everything together, and he's got a very clear view of how things should be done. And I guess part of that new challenge he talked about was F1 is different now to the one that Red Bull grew up in that it is cost-capped F1. So there's a chance to kind of set a new standard-setting team for this different era of F1. It's a different challenge, and that's what motivates someone like Adrian Newey. So, yeah, a motivated Adrian Newey working 24/7 is the last thing you want to be up against in Formula One.
This episode of the Race F1 podcast is sponsored by ZBiotics. ZBiotics is an absolute game changer because if, like me, you're in your mid-40s, having a night out with a few drinks can leave you feeling considerably worse the next day, and you can't bounce back the way you did when you were in your 20s. But with ZBiotics, you don't have to make that choice between having a great night or a great next day. There's a surefire way to wake up feeling fresh after a night of drinking. It's with pre-alcohol. ZBiotics pre-alcohol probiotic drink is the world's first genetically engineered probiotic. It was invented by PhD scientists to tackle rough mornings after drinking. And in the words of Jennifer Aniston, here's the science bit. When you drink, alcohol gets converted into a toxic byproduct in the gut. And it's this byproduct, not dehydration, that's to blame for your rough next day. Pre-alcohol produces an enzyme to break this byproduct down. So, just remember to make ZBiotics your first drink of the night, drink responsibly, and you'll feel your best tomorrow. Try it for yourself, and you will believe the hype. Go to zbiotics.com/race to learn more and get 15% off your first order when you use RACE at the checkout. ZBiotics is backed with a 100% money-back guarantee, so if you're unsatisfied for any reason, they'll refund your money, no questions asked. That's the letter Z, or Z, if like me you're in the UK, biotics.com/race and the code RACE at checkout for 15% off. One last time, zbiotics.com/race.
This episode is supported by Merrill. With a dedicated Merrill advisor, you get a personalized plan for your financial goals. And when plans change, Merrill's with you every step of the way. Go to ml.com/bullish to learn more. Merrill, a Bank of America company. What would you like the power to do? Investing involves risk. Merrill Lynch, Pierce, Fenner & Smith Incorporated, registered broker-dealer. Registered investment advisor. Member SIPC.
Time now to tell you about the sponsor of this episode, Grammarly. Do you struggle with when to use fewer instead of less? Do you find yourself writing important emails which, when you look back on them, take far too long to get to the point? Are you guilty of exclamation marks and too much jargon? Well, Grammarly is an AI writing partner that helps you find the words you need and the right text for your context. It learns your personal style and your brand or company style to give you personalised suggestions based on what you're writing and who's going to read it. Grammarly works across all the apps and sites you use like Word, Google Docs, Pages, Slack and more, so there's no need to copy and paste. Grammarly works where you work. Smart features like tone suggestions help you navigate even the most difficult work conversations. And what's more, data privacy and security are woven into the foundations of Grammarly. It's the gold standard of responsible AI with 15 years of best-in-class communication, trusted by tens of millions of professionals and IT departments. So get AI writing support that works where you work. Download Grammarly for free at grammarly.com/podcast. That's GRAMMARLY.com/podcast. Grammarly. Easier said, done.
Right, let's start to think a little bit about the detail now, Ben. Based on what we know of Newey, what can we expect to happen at Aston Martin? How will he use his technical leadership?
Well, I think initially he's been quite clear that his job is to kind of get his feet under the table and survey everything. So he's had the kind of, impressive tour of the shiny new facilities and been wowed by all the tools and the potential. Obviously, he knows Honda very well. So there's lots of different core elements that have attracted him and made him think, yeah, okay, this project's got potential, because he doesn't want to waste his time. But, as we've discussed a few times, there's this kind of galacticos element to Aston Martin in terms of, and I'm referring to kind of the Real Madrid teams of the past in football, where they would just seemingly hire as many big names as possible, smush them all together and hope that it translated to unmitigated success on the football pitch. And it's felt a little bit like that in terms of the technical structure at Aston Martin, it's just been, who can we get? Oh, let's take a guy let's take someone from Red Bull that we can get. Let's take some people from Mercedes. Let's take a guy who knew how to do the hybrid engines that will help us with Honda. Oh, let's get a Ferrari guy because they've got some different ideas and sometimes they're quick on certain circuits. And then let's bolster that with a few others as, you know, Aston's felt a bit more lost. And then now we've got Newey. He's kind of the big ticket, you know, maybe magic bullet thing. And then we've got to try and find a way to integrate that too. And it's felt from a distance like it could be quite incoherent and also potentially a bit of an ego fest nightmare. But in terms of the missing piece of the puzzle, what's interesting is that, you know, we probably went into this with this kind of preconceived idea that Newey's Red Bull super consultant type role would almost map across. No, I don't think any of us really predicted that he would come back with this kind of all-in, you know, full-time, going back to a retro version of himself almost type deal. And now it starts to make a bit more sense if you see him as this kind of technical managing overlord who's basically going to be charged with, right, these are the people we've got. It's, as Stroll actually, he tried to back out of this during the press, but he let slip, oh, you know, we've taken the wrong direction. Things aren't really quite working as he hoped. He tried to desperately say he wasn't unhappy with where they are in the championship, but he quite clearly is unhappy that they're fifth right now, that they're underperforming. And that's a poor reflection on the people they have now, really, is the inference you can take from that. So Newey's got to find initially a way to structure all of this so that all of those people can work together better and start to get Aston on the right kind of short-term development path, stop this kind of repeated pattern of bringing updates that just make the car horrible to drive and they start off okay and just go backwards through the season. And at the same time, he's got to be all guns blazing. When he mentions his 3 ways of working, you know, 2 of those were related to working with other people, and I've covered that. But the other way of working for Newey is shutting himself off in a room, solitary, as he put it, with his drawing board and coming up with ideas. And there's going to be a lot of pressure on him and probably Enrico Cardile when he joins next year on 2026 and coming up with those kind of future-looking conceptual ideas that are going to give Aston Martin and Honda a head start when the rules reset and Formula One, in theory, resets in about, 18 months' time.
Yeah, and I think initially that task of organising, right, how are we going to use these facilities to maximise Adrian, that is going to be the task of Andy Cowell, the group CEO, who also reports direct to Lawrence. He replaces Martin Whitmarsh. And he's someone with a great technical background, of course. And his former mucker, Bob Bell, the executive director, his specialisation is in the facilities, is in maximising the facilities, understanding what's needed, where the team is at, and how you exploit everything from what you have. And I think the initial preparation for Adrian landing will be Andy Cowell and Bob Bell talking to some of the people there. That's the way it's going to be initially, and then, you know, Adrian can arrive and you start understanding, you know, how it all works, and as he proceeds, then he will be taking more responsibility for that under his wing. But yes, initially the task of getting this Galactico group, as you put it, Ben, working in all pointing in the same direction. That's initially going to be Andy Cowell, and there couldn't be a better person to do it. He's terrific,
great guy
in terms of not just his technical understanding, but also his way with people. He's very good, very personable, and he's hugely respected. And so yes, he's much more than just somebody that understands power units and will be able to help Honda integrate it. He's one of the pillars of the foundation, really, of the team, and he again a recent addition. So yeah, I think you're gonna see by 26, I think all these technical heavyweights, they will all have very clear tasks focused towards 26. It's a bit like the run up to the hybrid formula for Mercedes, and you remember that they had all these former technical directors, and everybody said, what are they doing with all these people? And then you saw exactly what they were doing with all these people by the time we got to 2014. They'd all been working on separate projects, all coming together in time for the new formula, and I think we'll be seeing something very similar here.
Well, certainly Newey's talked about the focus very much being on 26. Obviously, Honda's arrival, the new regs, etc., etc. That's the obvious opportunity. There'll be attempts to make things work in the short term, but yeah, that Bell-Newey-Cowell triumvirate seems quite important. The one thing that interests me, Mark, is how Enrique Cardile fits in. And I only say that because everyone else is already there, including Dan Fallows, who's technical director who worked with Newey for 15-odd years at Red Bull. So as long as he's happy with this happening, I imagine Newey will know very well what he can offer. But Cardile obviously was recruited as chief technical officer. He's not arrived yet. And then Newey's come in, and he's just the one that we don't really know what's going to happen. Because the one thing we do know is Newey will want everyone to kind of buy into the same thing. And Cardile seems a little bit the wild card. Clearly very, very accomplished, and they'll aim to make use of him. But I think if you're Enrico Cardile, you'd be thinking, how's this going to work out? Could be great, but
yeah,
I just wonder. I wonder if that sort of squeezes out that chief technical officer role, and if he'll need a slightly modified position.
Yeah, I would guess that they're probably going to do something between him and Dan Fallows, and it's maybe where they do that alternate car thing that we've seen before, notably at McLaren, where they each take charge of different projects year on year. I wouldn't be surprised if we do something like that, because, as you say, chief technical officer sort of overlaps with the Newey role and that of Dan Fallows. So I would think there'll probably be a little bit of bringing together the various tasks that they each have.
Or maybe they'll swap a couple of years down the road, like Mercedes did with Mike Elliott and James Allison, and they'll go, right, you can go and do the more hands-on stuff, and you can do the more future stuff, and then, oh no, we'll swap back because it's not quite working that way. There's at least some kind of precedent for having those two roles within the same team, but they can't overlap too much, can they? Otherwise, you just have two people doing the same job, and that will be the fear, I guess, for both of them, and until it's been properly laid out.
I think one thing we can be sure of is that Newey's not going to get sucked into endless administration and managerial stuff. He's the sort of big picture technical leader for it. I mean, Lawrence Stroll said, I'll leave the structure up to Adrian, so Newey can come in and say, right, this is the way I see it should be, but he'll do that collaboratively. I think the only thing that Newey will insist on is just more the mindset towards working. The fact that it's always talked about how open he is to ideas. He's never suffered from kind of not invented here syndrome insofar as it's not my ideas or nothing. He draws ideas from everything, and I think that's essential for any Formula One team, that everyone has that kind of open mind. It doesn't matter whose idea, whose pet project something is. You've got to make decisions that work for your racing team in the best possible way. So I imagine that's the one area where there may be problems with Newey, with anyone there, if he thinks, oh, you're not really buying into this in the right way. But as you alluded to, Mark, for the reaction that the rank and file had and everyone there, no matter what your role is, if Adrian Newey's coming in with this sort of Uber role and also playing a part in the whole direction of the whole F1 team as well, because he is a shareholder, he's basically there with Lawrence Stroll, you're thinking, yeah, this is the opportunity to really, really go for it.
Yeah, if you're working there, and all the teams sort of intermingle and get jobs, they go from one team to another to get a better pay or a more senior role. If you've got this talisman joining, you're going to think, no, I'm going to stay here. This is going to be really good. You're not going to be thinking, I'm getting out of here when they've just recruited Adrian.
And Alonso finally looks like a genius as well, doesn't he? By going to that team and then extending his stay. This could finally be the moment where the stars align for him and one of his recent driver moves properly pays off.
Yeah, and I think he's intimated that his current deal will be his last one, so 2026 on that basis would be his final year. So, yeah, if they hit the ground running in 26, we might just have a sensational send-off for Alonso.
Yeah, and I think definitely Alonso needs that shot in the arm because he's been showing his frustration a little bit with some of his driving. We've talked about the fact that sometimes when Alonso's frustrated, it comes through in his sort of belligerent driving, I call it. And some people have interpreted that as a decline with age. I don't think there's anything to say that's the case. I see this as just Alonso being really irritated with life and not always delivering at his absolute best. But I may be wrong, but I think it's still in there, and I think he'll be very, very motivated by this whole thing. But it's gonna be fantastic because also people say, oh well, at Red Bull it took Newey this long, but Newey's joining the Aston Martin project much further down the line. They've got the factory, they've got the wind tunnel, they've got the new driver and loop simulator, they've recruited loads of people. So Newey is coming in at a much further down the line in the process, but he talked about the infrastructure he's seen, etc. There's stuff there I've been thinking, this is brilliant. I really like the look of all this. And coming from Red Bull, his standards are pretty high. One of the things actually he talked about was the factory, and he said, I've seen some new buildings that haven't quite fulfilled that in terms of what's needed in Formula One, which was an obvious dig at MTC at McLaren. I thought Newey's very, very good at being critical of things without actually being critical of them. But you know what he thinks because he's such a sharp character. So yeah, there's a lot of raw material there, and they may be underachieving currently, but so many of those key strategic decisions that have been made have been really good. And Newey could be, as he was described, the final piece of the puzzle. He should be still. Nothing's a guarantee of success, but they've ticked so many boxes. And now it's just a question of fitting it all together.
Well, there's a lot of pressure on him to deliver, isn't there? I think he did quite a good job of deflecting. There was one question about, do you feel the pressure to deliver or make an impact? And he did the kind of stock sportsman answer of, all my pressure comes from within. And of course, that's true. But he, being so competitive, he is someone who likes to make an impact. And he's even written about, being at previous teams and feeling like when you move somewhere, which he hasn't done that often, let's face it, he feels the need to come in and make a statement, do something to really transform the team's prospects and move them forward. So there will be that sort of inherent desire to put his stamp on it, but also just the fact that they've kind of almost built the empire for him to arrive. And then Lawrence Stroll himself has made this big play of I've pursued him for 3 years and I've led the negotiations and I've toured Adrian around here and I've convinced him to join and I'm making him a partner. We're partners together. We're in it together for a long time. Newey's got to live up to that hype now, because if they don't, if 2026 is a damp squib and some of the problems Aston are experiencing now persist, a lot of that focus is going to be on Newey. All this kind of cheer and pomp and circumstance for him joining, justified based on his reputation and good on him. But with all of that and the shareholding and the salary, as reported, that comes with a huge amount of expectation. He's got to live up to that in what is, becoming the twilight of his career as well. So there's quite a lot riding on this, I think.
Well, you say twilight of the career, but I'm wondering if there's a possibility that this is his 7th F1 team. This actually could be the key move of his career. It could be one that's defining, which is amazing to say because I didn't think that before I heard the details of what he was doing. But that's Newey. He's somebody who, he's not just some mad genius. He is really grounded in everything. He gets how to do everything. He understands how things have to fit together and work. He brings not just great intellect, but a great temperament, outlook, culture, etc. Those are all the things that are in Newey, which is why I think you can have as high confidence as is possible to have that this will work. Obviously, Honda's still got to do its job. Everyone on the team has still got to do their job. There's lots of factors that will play into this. He could end up in a Red Bull Renault situation where the Honda engine's rubbish in 2026, and no matter how good the car is, they're struggling. I doubt that, but it's always possible. So, yeah, he is as close to a guarantee of success as you can get, but no one person can actually ever deliver that. But
he could fall out with Lawrence as well. That's the other thing.
It's possible, yeah. It's possible.
They're coming in as this kind of buddy prospect, and everything's rosy, now before it starts. But of course, again, with all those expectations and everything Lawrence has done, and you mentioned, Ed, all the money he's poured in to try and make this thing a success, no one can doubt Stroll's commitment, ambition, and backing that up with finance. But again, it has to come together. And if this timeline is missed, he's clearly putting a lot into 2026. He sounds quietly disappointed with how things have gone so far, but he, like everyone, recognises this massive opportunity. Like Mark outlined, they're trying to repeat the Mercedes trick of 2014, get everything in line early, hit the ground running, and make a huge step from midfield, upper midfield, occasional ankle biting of the top teams into proper bona fide championship winner. It's quite a big leap, because I think Mercedes, towards the end of the previous rules cycle, are in a better place to hit 2014 well than Aston maybe is at the moment. But nevertheless, it's all about 26, and that's kind of probably placating Stroll in terms of his patience at the moment, that he can see this kind of fairly near-term massive opportunity. But again, it won't take long, if that's not working out for whatever reason, for then him to become annoyed, for the pressure to build on everybody, and maybe if that relationship fractures, the whole thing could fall apart. That's what I mean by riding on it. Newey's gone all in. It's very exciting, but at the same time, there's a risk to going into that level of investment in the team with a guy who's so driven and so determined for it to succeed. Him being this kind of such an involved owner, it matters more to him maybe than some others, the on-track results.
The good thing is there's a good run-up to 2026 to come. Obviously, actually, Newey can't start work at Aston Martin until March as part of his Red Bull deal. He's finishing off the RB17. The car's finished, but they're still selling cars and doing work to promote that. So, and obviously, he'll be thinking about what he's doing at Aston Martin. But hopefully, that little run into it is positive. But this is, as you point out, this is kind of the second attempt at reshaping what they're doing to deliver. And, it's good. I actually thought that when Lawrence Stroll was talking, that was the sort of most substance and convincingness he's brought to talking about what his team's doing, if you see what I mean. Because I think he's kind of bought into the timeline for this and what Newey needs to do, etc. So we'll see how it plays out. But like you say, it could go wrong. There's absolutely no guarantees in this game.
This episode is supported by Merrill. With a dedicated Merrill advisor, you get a personalized plan for your financial goals. And when plans change, Merrill's with you every step of the way. Go to ml.com/bullish to learn more. Merrill, a Bank of America company. What would you like the power to do? Investing involves risk. Merrill Lynch, Pierce, Fenner & Smith Incorporated, registered broker-dealer. Registered investment advisor. Member SIPC.
Poker ASMR. Almost as much as I love playing poker, I love the sounds of poker. The chips, the cards, the hands, and of course the WSOP app sounds. If you love poker, play poker.
Download the WSOP free-to-play app and hear for yourself.
Right, let's finally, Mark, just have a look at the starting point for Newey, which is basically where Aston Martin is right now. Yeah, he doesn't start until next March, but he's joining a team that, while still evolving and that is still bringing in things like the wind tunnel and the driver and loop simulator, so still building up, it's still underachieving against its potential, isn't it?
It is, yeah. And in a way, it's not too surprising. It expanded incredibly fast. This was Racing Point not very long ago with a couple of hundred employees. So when you expand as quick as that, inevitably you're not getting everything working smoothly and without friction. And it takes time. It takes time for the people to understand each other, for the departments to work together. And at the same, while all that's been happening, the facility itself has been expanding as well. So, yeah, it's punching below its weight at the moment. It should be more than the fifth fastest team. It should be more than an upper midfield team, which is all that it is at the moment. But we've seen glimpses of potential. We saw the beginning of last year when they were probably the second quickest team after Red Bull for half a season, or a few races at the beginning of the season at least. But they have lost their way. The development of the ground effect cars has been quite tricky for everyone, and some have been quicker onto it than others, and they've definitely lost their way on that, and they've gone a long way in the wrong direction. And basically, there's a lot of understanding still to happen before they can sort of reverse out of that and with this current generation of car, and whether they can do that in time for 25 with a little bit of guidance from Adrian, who knows, but that's pretty much already set in stone really in terms of its potential. The exciting bit is 26, and then that's I think that's as early as we could realistically expect to see any Newey effect.
Yeah, definitely on the Newey side. Obviously, just the facts of contract and availability limit the influence he can have before the rules reset. But in terms of the current team realising its potential, the facilities is obviously one aspect, but I'm still not convinced that's kind of the defining thing, because when you look at McLaren, they had a lot of things coming on stream, but they made a leap really before any of that had a huge effect. There was a lot of latent potential in the team that a rejig of personnel and Andrea Stella's leadership, etc., galvanised. And you could see, okay, it wasn't fully realised, but the big chunk of initial progress they made from a really low point at the start of 23 to being basically on Red Bull's heels, or the next best, certainly by the end, was just down to kind of getting more out of what's there. And that's the bit of Aston Martin I don't quite grasp at the moment. I don't know if Newey's going to be the one to do that galvanising and make it all click into place, maybe. But certainly it feels to me like up till now, they've kind of reached in all sorts of different directions and occasionally touched on some good things and benefited a little bit from other teams underperforming and not realising their own potential, but ultimately just haven't quite been able to maximise what potential they have now, never mind what extra potential they might have from all this new shiny stuff coming online, plus Newey joining, plus Honda joining in the future.
Well, this is why it is quite important to see progression the rest of this year and next year. Obviously, as we said, Newey doesn't start till March, so he can't really breathe on the car, but he may have some of the answers they need of where to look, so that can help them with 25. But one of the things I think McLaren were very good at, Andreas Seidel, under his leadership, they made some very, very good big strategic things, the wind tunnel, the driver and loop simulator, the Mercedes engine deal, etc., etc. But there was a little bit of a feeling of, it'll all be good when that comes. Whereas what I think Andreas Stella, when he took over, brought is yes, the wind tunnel was a bit of a limitation, but it was like the last 1% we're getting from it, and we weren't maximising that. And I think that's a really important cultural point, actually. And that's one of the things...
Eliminating excuses, basically, isn't it?
It's partly that, but also, it's not even necessarily an excuse. It's just that if you say, right, 26 is the year, then unless you're making sure you're really hammering into people, it's like, but this is part of 26 now. What we do in 24 is part of 26. What we do with the car in 25, because it's all learning, it's science, it's understanding, and it's making
Look at Audi.
Sure. Yeah, exactly.
That's the same thing they're going through now, right?
Same problem. And I think McLaren are very good at this. It's like, right, maximise, because if you spend 25 maximising a top of the midfield car, or one that can hang on to the top four or whatever, but absolutely maximising it, keeping the development going, then you hit the ground running as a better team at the start of 26. It's not like it'll come together suddenly. So that, I think, is a really important cultural thing to set. But the good thing is about Newey is, even though he's not there yet, he's still somebody who's very competitive, isn't he, Mark? You know, Adrian Newey won't want to see them just being a bit rubbish in 25, will he? He won't tolerate that. He'll say, right, we've got to do what we can to improve, and I want to see that we are actually making the most of what we've got and learning. It won't be his main focus, but it doesn't mean 25 is just this free hit that doesn't matter. No,
that's very true. And the breakthrough that McLaren made was actually something, an understanding, a technical understanding, and what they were looking for and how they measured it. And that was the breakthrough for them, really. And it may well be that it's something similar could happen here. And Adrian he's very good at course correcting, on if something's going off on the wrong path. He's very good at saying, maybe not prioritise that. Maybe it's worth looking at this. And the guys will then go away and try and discover something that they wouldn't have been looking at otherwise, and sometimes it comes good that way. So yeah, it's possible. It's possible that he will feed in a very positive way in 25. But yeah, for now, the team just seems to have got itself boxed in a corner technically.
Well, that point about the changes that, say, McLaren made in terms of what they were looking at, it's all about what characteristics, what numbers basically you're aiming to get from the car in the wind tunnel. And because there was this seismic change really in F1, James Allison, I've referred to this quote before, talked about, well, with the old cars, under the old rules, you could keep piling downforce on and you kept finding performance seemingly infinitely. Whereas that's very different with these, again, repeating myself, but more three-dimensional. So you need a different kind of set of criteria for what you're trying to achieve. And Newey will know all of that. So that there's a lot of knowledge and know-how that Newey can just sort of breathe on the team straight away, I would think. But then again, this team's had lots of know-how from all manner of other teams, and what we want to see, I think the key thing that has been missing is the ability to kind of self-generate the progress and knowledge, because I feel the 23 car, which started with the 22 Spain upgrade, if you remember, they did a big change there that was the kind of proto 23 direction, and that was all about sort of changing the things that they were focusing on with the 22, 23 direction. But then it didn't become self-sustaining, that knowledge. Lots of new people came in with ideas. They kind of fed a bit into the 23 car, which was a good step, but then it wasn't fully self-generating, and they're still having problems with porpoising from the car, characteristic problems. That Canada upgrade last year created characteristic problems. They were mixing and matching for ages, and we've had the same pattern this year with upgrades coming in, causing some problems. The upgrade they had for just before the break at Hungary seemed to help a bit. So this is, I think, the key thing for that team in the sort of short term, to become self-sustaining in terms of that knowledge. Do you want to throw in the negative view there, Ben? Because obviously you were very good at putting the counterpoint in terms of there's no guarantee. But again, coming back to the fact the team hasn't got the most out of it, there are some things that just aren't quite working as they should be, even though there's all this ability, hugely intelligent people, massive facilities, massive number of people, but it's not the sum of its parts, is it? Let alone more than the sum of its parts.
No, it's not. And that's where, this Alonso irritation you mentioned feeds in, that you talked about his belligerent driving, which he's been known for at different points to his career when he's felt he's been in a bit of a lost cause in the short term. But it also applies to what he's been saying. Some of the comments he's been coming out with, even as recently as Monza, quite punchy in terms of Aston being experts on hard lessons and doing developments that basically haven't moved them forwards. They've sometimes gone backwards or even only sideways. And he's been quite publicly critical, effectively, of this whole technical team behind him, not really grasping the nettle of the regulations and how to sustain that development. They seem to, like as you say, they started 23 very strongly, but they had a huge run up to get that car right, having underwhelmed at the start of 22, so there was kind of a mini course correction. At that point, you kind of felt like this was the Fallows era of Aston Martin, right? He'd come in, brought some understanding. There was even accusations that Aston Martin was effectively a Red Bull copy. The green bullet was dubbed, wasn't it?
Which were never fair.
I know it wasn't fair, but you still had this sense of, well, they've taken some ideas from outside, you want to be self-sustaining, as you say, but to start with, obviously, you need to be humble enough to go, right, well, this is where we are. What can we look at? Even the top teams won't shy away from it. I remember Red Bull at some point early on in this rule set, they took something from Williams, didn't they? We did a bit of a feature on how they borrowed some small thing from Williams that probably Newey had spotted and integrated. So you're always patchworking certain things that you see from around the grid that you think might enhance your performance. And Aston did that, used that last part of 22 to really give themselves a ramp to 23, started really well. But I always feel slightly that 23 is caveated by just how poor McLaren were compared to what they've shown us they were capable of being. Plus Mercedes and Ferrari just being so hopelessly lost at that point. Ferrari had a massive downturn in 23. Mercedes were all over the place and only really recently have got themselves together. So although Aston was second best, they were almost second best by accident and were overachieving. And I don't know if that kind of made them a little bit complacent. I had a sort of sense in the middle of 23 when they were saying, "Oh, well, it's already been a great success," and then the development just kind of tailed off, and they got into that whole period of being really lost and having to mix and match parts before the final 2 races to kind of get the car back together. It just felt like that was a key inflection point where if they really were onto something, they would have sustained that early form through 23 and kept going as others kind of started their fight back. But it's never really happened, and that's where I feel like something's missing. Maybe Newey is the one who's going to finally come together, coalesce that thing into a coherent whole, and say, "Oh yeah, you're just missing these kind of few key bits here that, as Mark says, you work it back, and suddenly they'll go, oh yeah, why didn't we think of that?" They'll feel like thickos when in fact, it just needed someone stepped back who could see the whole rather than those individual bits. But at the same time, it's difficult for everyone, as Mark explained. So the one saving grace probably for Aston at the moment is they're not alone in being a team that brings updates to the car that just don't work, and then they find themselves spending races unpicking it. Look at RB at the moment, who started the season really strongly in that midfield fight, and then since Silverstone, they've been absolutely nowhere with their upgrade. So you can, not only is it difficult all round, but, and this is a warning, I guess, for the likes of Mercedes too, you can feel like you've cracked it within your own sphere of competitiveness, and then the next thing you know, you've thrown yourselves out again. Ferrari have done it too. So I think Aston can probably take some solace from the fact that, yes, they've been disappointing, but the challenge they're up against is probably one of the more difficult challenges there's been in terms of a set of Formula One technical regulations.
I think the great thing about this is obviously the Where's Newey Going story has been a huge one that's been speculated on for months, but this just injects fresh impetus into the whole Aston Martin story as well, doesn't it, Mark? It is just a massive story, and it's going to be great to track how the team sort of starts to do in terms of the short term. Then Newey will come in. What's the new structure, etc.? Do we see an upturn in 2025 and then the anticipation of 26? It's adding yet another thread into a 2024 season that's just fantastic in terms of everything that's going on off track, on track. Certainly in recent races, on track's been fascinating. So it's overall, it's just another good news story for Formula One, isn't it?
It is, yeah. It's a whole new dimension, really, to the storyline to follow, and it has the potential to shake up the front of Formula One, and it has the potential to, completely reset everything. But it's going to be fascinating to watch just how it plays out and how close to the potential of all those people and all those facilities it can get to.
Yeah, and I think we're going to be talking about it plenty over the coming years. Thanks very much, Mark and Ben. Reminder to everyone that if you want to participate a bit more in the race, we've got the Race Members Club on Patreon. There's currently a 7-day free trial on that. So if you head to Patreon and search for the race or look around on our website, you'll find some information about that. You get to ask questions on the podcast. We're going to start doing live streams shortly. So, hopefully some extra content for you there. And otherwise, we have got another race to go to. So stay with us for everything you need to know from the Azerbaijan Grand Prix.
The Athletic.
College football is back like never before. I'm David Ubben, and I host Until Saturday, the Athletics Leveled Up College Football Podcast. 3 times a week, you'll hear me and my co-hosts, fellow Athletics senior writer Chris Vanini and 2-time national champion Damian Harris, embrace the sport's new madness with you. We're also just going to have a ton of fun enjoying all the things that make college football great. Check out the brand new Until Saturday every Monday, Wednesday, and Thursday this fall. You can find us wherever you listen to your podcasts.